She walked into the bank as a CEO, closing a $2 billion deal. She walked out with her dignity. But without the deal, after her ID was thrown to the floor. She was born in a small town where people didn't expect much from girls like her. Her mother worked 2 jobs, and her father had left when she was just 6 years old. Even as a child, she noticed the way people looked at her family like they didn't belong. But she also noticed something else. Her mother's hands. They were always busy, always tired, always moving. And they taught her the most important lesson she would ever learn: keep going no matter what. She was smart. From the very beginning, her teachers noticed it. While other children struggled with math, she loved it. Numbers made sense to her. They were clear, honest, and fair. She could look at a problem and see the solution in her head before anyone else. But the world outside the classroom wasn't always so fair. In high school, she was one of only 3 black students in her advanced math class. When she answered too quickly, some teachers would look at her with doubt, as if she had cheated. Some students whispered that she was too ambitious. But she didn't care. She had a goal in her heart that burned stronger than anything anyone said. She got into a good college with a scholarship. It wasn't easy. She worked part-time at a coffee shop, sometimes staying up all night to finish assignments. She couldn't afford the fancy clothes or the latest phones like other students, but she had something better vision. She majored in business and computer science because she believed the future would be written in code and contracts. She wanted to be a part of that future. After college, she worked at a few tech companies. Each time, she had to work twice as hard to prove herself. She knew what it felt like to be the only black woman in the room, to be talked over in meetings, to be praised only after someone else repeated her idea. But she learned, she watched, and she planned. She saved every extra dollar she made connections quietly. She took note of what worked and what didn't, and when the moment was right, she quit her job and launched her own company. It wasn't big at first. Just her and 2 interns working out of a shared office. They had only 1 computer between them. What they had was powerful, an idea that could change the way small businesses handled digital payments. Her software was smooth, simple, and secure. She called her company SafeStream. It wasn't flashy, but it worked better than anything else out there. She knew how to sell it. She knocked on doors. She sent emails. She made phone calls. Most people didn't respond. Some asked to speak to the real founder, assuming she was a secretary. But slowly, the right people began to listen. One small bank tried her software, then another. Then a regional chain. Within 3 years, SafeStream was one of the fastest-growing fintech startups in the country. People started noticing her. Business magazines featured her on their top 40 under 40 lists. Investors came knocking. She gave TED-style talks about leadership and ethics. But even then, she never forgot who she was or where she came from. She hired young engineers from overlooked neighborhoods. She gave internships to students who reminded her of herself. And she made sure her employees felt heard, respected, and seen. Then came the biggest opportunity of her life. A major international financial firm, one of the top 5 in the world, was looking for a new digital partner. They had reviewed over 100 companies. After months of talks, site visits, and technology testing, they narrowed it down to 2 candidates. SafeStream was one of them. Her heart raced when she got the final call. They had chosen her company. A $2 billion partnership was about to begin. It would take her business to a whole new level. They told her they just needed to complete a few final verifications, including some routine banking document checks. Easy. She had done that sort of thing before. She received an email from the bank where the verification would take place. It was a well-known national banquet with glass buildings and polished floors. The appointment was scheduled for a Thursday morning. She planned everything the night before, checked her ID, packed her business portfolio, wore her favorite navy blue blazer, and arrived 10 minutes early. It was just another step, she told herself. One more stone on the path she had built with her own hands. She had no idea what was waiting on the other side of the glass door. When she walked into the bank, it was quiet. A few customers sat waiting. teller behind the counter glanced up, and then back down at her computer. The CEO stepped forward, smiled, and said she was there for a document verification. She handed over her state ID and business card. The teller didn't smile back. She picked up the ID, looked at it, then at the CEO, and her face shifted. Cold, suspicious. She said nothing. Just stared for a few seconds too long. Then, without a word, she tossed the ID onto the floor in front of the counter. It hit the tile with a sharp sound and slid a few inches toward the woman's feet. Everything in the room went still. For a second, the CEO thought she must have imagined it. Maybe it slipped. Maybe the teller didn't mean it. But when she looked up, the expression on the teller's face told her otherwise. It wasn't an accident. It was a message. The CEO bent down slowly, picked up her ID, and stood up straight. Her hands were steady, but her chest was tight. She asked, as calmly as she could, to speak to a manager. The teller didn't move. A few seconds later, a man came from the back. The CEO explained what had just happened. The manager looked at her, then at the teller, and said, "I'm sure. It was just a misunderstanding." He didn't apologize. He didn't ask the teller what happened. He just repeated that they had strict identity verification procedures and suggested she reschedule. She stood there, her ID still in her hand, her voice caught in her throat. She thought about the deal, about her team waiting in the office, about the years of hard work that had brought her here, about all the times she had swallowed moments like this just to move forward. Yeah, but this time she couldn't. Not like this. She looked the manager in the eye and said thank you, and she turned around and walked out of the bank. Her heels clicked softly against the polished floor as every pair of eyes in the room followed her. Some wide with shock, some full of shame, some just watching like it was entertainment. When she reached her car, she sat behind the wheel and stared at the steering wheel for a long time. Her fingers trembled, not from fear, but from fury. A slow, rising fury that threatened to crack the surface of her calm. She breathed deeply. Once, twice. Then she reached for her phone. She wasn't going to stay silent this time. She called her team. Told them what happened. They were outraged. Some of them cried. One of her interns offered to go to the bank himself and speak up, but she told them no, not yet, not like that. That night she didn't sleep. She thought about every boardroom. She had entered every deal she had made, every person who had doubted her. She thought about the long road behind her and the road that might now be blocked in front of her because one stranger saw her skin before her name. But she also thought about her mother's hands, always moving, always working, always holding. And she would not break. She would not beg. She would not stop. This was not the end of her story, not even close. The morning sun had barely warmed the streets when she stepped out of her apartment. Her shoes clicked confidently on the pavement as she walked to her car. She had always believed that how you start your day shapes everything that follows. So, she dressed like a leader. A sharp navy blue suit, white blouse, and the pearl earrings her mother had given her for good luck. Her laptop bag was neatly packed, documents perfectly organized. Today was not just another day. It was supposed to be the final step toward something extraordinary. The $2 billion partnership deal was nearly complete. Months of back-and-forth meetings, document reviews, presentations, and technical evaluations had all led to this. All she had to do now was get one routine verification, done at the bank's simple step. She wasn't nervous. She had done this kind of thing dozens of times before. Just show your ID, confirm your business identity, sign a form, and it's done. It's what she expected. The bank wasn't far, just a 15-minute drive in morning traffic. As she parked, she took a deep breath and reminded herself that she deserved to be here. She had worked hard for every inch of success. She didn't come from money or big connections. She built her business from nothing. This wasn't luck. This was earned. She walked into the bank, the air-conditioned chill brushing against her face. Inside, it was quiet. A few customers were seated, some scrolling on their phones, others looking around. The walls were clean and modern. Rap music played softly from hidden speakers. A large logo of the bank shined behind the row of teller counters. She stepped up to the front desk, smiled politely, and explained why she was there. The receptionist nodded and directed her to a particular counter. The teller there was a young woman with straight blonde hair pulled into a tight ponytail. Her name tag said Emily. The CEO greeted her with a confident but kind tone, reached into her bag, and handed over her government-issued ID and company documents. Emily glanced at the ID. Then she looked up. There was a pause, a strange, heavy silence. The teller's expression didn't match the tone of a typical customer service interaction. It was cold, detached, as if she had already decided something in her mind. She tilted her head slightly, looked at the CEO again, and then looked back down at the ID. She didn't say a word. Her eyes narrowed for a moment. Of her hand, she tossed the ID down. It didn't just fall from her fingers, it was thrown. The plastic card hit the marble counter edge, bounced off, and landed on the floor near the woman's feet. The sound was sharp, clean, like a slap in a silent room. Time slowed. The CEO blinked. At first, she didn't believe what had just happened. She looked around, wondering if anyone else had noticed. They had a few heads turned. A man seated nearby raised his eyebrows. An older woman looked down quickly, pretending not to see. The CEO looked back at the teller, expecting her to say something, an apology, a correction, even a casual oops. But Emily said nothing. She didn't even look sorry. In fact, there was something in her eyes that made the CEO's stomach turn, a mix of challenge and quiet disrespect. She bent down slowly, picked up her ID, stood tall, and placed it gently on the counter again. Her hands were steady, but her heart was beating fast. Not from fear, from fury. But it was the kind of fury she had learned to swallow a long time ago. The kind that built up quietly, like heat behind a glass window. She looked Emily straight in the eyes and asked to speak with a manager. Emily didn't flinch. "One moment," she said in a flat voice, then turned away without looking at the CEO again. A few minutes passed. They felt like hours. Every second stood heavy in the air. When the manager came out, he was a tall man in his late 40s, with a polite smile and sharp suit. He approached with a professional air and asked how he could help. The CEO explained calmly what had happened. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't curse. She didn't break down. She stated the facts, what she handed over, what was done, and how it was done. She hoped for understanding, or at least concern, but the manager's smile faded into a neutral, rehearsed expression. He looked at Emily, then at the CEO, and said, "I'm sure it was just a misunderstanding. Our tellers are trained to follow identity procedures carefully." He didn't ask for details. Didn't question Emily. He didn't offer an apology. The CEO stood frozen. Her mind raced. Is he defending what just happened? Is he suggesting she imagined it? She glanced at the other customers. No one spoke. A few avoided her eyes. She said, "Do you really believe it's your protocol to throw someone's ID on the floor?" The manager shrugged slightly. "I didn't witness the event, ma'am. But if something was misunderstood, I do apologize. For any inconvenience, it was the kind of apology that doesn't mean anything. The kind of sentence people say when they want a problem to disappear." She thanked him and walked out. Not because she wanted to, not because she was done, but because she knew there was no point standing there any longer. These people had already decided who they thought she was. Outside, the sun was brighter, too bright. The light stung her eyes. As she reached her car and sat in the driver's seat, she didn't drive. She didn't even put the keys in the ignition. She just sat there, hands still gripping her ID, replaying the moment again and again. It wasn't just about the ID. It wasn't just about Emily. It was about the quiet, cruel way the manager backed it up without saying it out loud. It was about how no one around her stood up. It was about how a moment like that could tear through years of hard-earned dignity in seconds. She opened her phone and recorded a voice memo, not to post online, just to document what happened, because she didn't want to forget the details. Not even one. The tone, the faces, the silence, the wait. Then she called her assistant and explained the situation. The assistant was stunned. "Should I call the bank's corporate office?" she asked, but the CEO said no. Yet. She needed to think. She needed to breathe. By the end of the day, the team at SafeStream knew what had happened. They were outraged. One of her board members even offered to pull out of the bank entirely. Her communications director drafted a statement to post online, but the CEO paused it all. She wanted to wait, not because she was afraid, but because she understood the game. One wrong move, and the $2 billion deal could be at risk. The partner firm was watching. They liked clean, quiet success stories, not controversy. Later that night, a security guard who worked at the bank and recognized her name sent an anonymous message through LinkedIn. He said, "I saw what happened today. I'm so sorry. It shouldn't have happened. If you need a witness, I'm here." The message was short, but it hit her heart hard. Someone had seen. Someone had cared enough to speak. She thought again about the partner company. She wondered what they would do if they knew, what they support. Her? Would they see this as a problem worth addressing? Would they choose silence the way powerful institutions often do? She drafted an email to the firm's senior contact, but didn't send it yet. She wasn't sure what to write. Should she be calm and professional, or raw and honest? Should she tell them everything, or just enough? That night, she barely slept. She kept seeing the moment over and over, the ID flying, the teller's face, the cold dismissal from the manager, but most of all, she kept feeling the echo of the silence that followed. A silence more painful than words. She didn't know it yet, but this moment would become the turning point in her life. Not the $2 billion deal, not the award-winning product, not the magazine covers. It would be the day she was treated. Like she didn't belong in a place where she had every right to be, and it wasn't over, not even close. She sat at her desk the next morning, staring at the blank email draft on her laptop. The words she needed to write were heavy, full of pain, anger, and truth. But she couldn't find the right way to start. How do you explain something that cuts so deep, especially when the people reading it hold the future of your company in their hands? The international firm, the one offering the $2 billion partnership, was waiting for confirmation that the final steps had been completed. All she had to do was send over a simple message. Verification successful. That would keep everything on track. The meetings, the launch, the joint announcement was all lined up, but nothing about it felt right anymore. She had spent years building SafeStream, pouring her soul into it. She believed in her work. She believed in her team. But after what happened at the bank, something inside her had changed. It wasn't just about one rude employee or one cold manager. It was about a deeper truth she had tried to ignore for too long, that even when you reach the top, the world still finds a way to question your worth if you look a certain way. She thought of her interns. Smart, hopeful. What lesson would she teach them if she stayed silent now? That disrespect should be swallowed quietly. That success means accepting mistreatment just to keep going. No, that wasn't who she was. Not anymore. She began typing. Slowly, carefully. Truthfully, she explained what happened at the bank, how the teller had thrown her ID, how the manager brushed it off, how she walked away feeling humiliated and invisible. She made it clear this wasn't about ego or pride. It was about dignity. She had gone in as the CEO of a company about to close a historic deal. And she had walked out feeling like she didn't matter at all. She didn't demand anything in the email. She didn't threaten. She simply shared the truth. She ended with one powerful line. This moment may not mean much to those who've never experienced it, but for those of us who have, it is unforgettable. She read it 3 times before sending it. Then she closed her laptop and went for a walk. The city was alive with the usual sounds: cars honking, people talking, footsteps on sidewalks. But in her mind, there was only silence. A silence filled with worry. Had she made a mistake? Would the firm pull out of the deal? Would they see her as too emotional or difficult? These were fears that many successful black women knew too well. Speaking up often came with a price. That evening, she received a reply. It was from the Vice President of Strategic Partnerships. The message was short. "Thank you for sharing this with us. We take this seriously and we'll review. Internally, we'll get back to you." That was it. No emotion, no apology, no assurance. The next few days were some of the longest in her life. Her team kept asking for updates. She told them the truth. No final word yet. They trusted her, but she could feel their worry. Everyone had worked so hard for this moment. Losing it now would be a crushing blow. Behind closed doors, she started planning for both outcomes. If the deal went through, she would use her new platform to advocate for fairness in corporate spaces. But if it fell apart, she would still rise. She had already overcome more than most people ever knew. 2 days later, she received another email. This time it was from the firm's legal department. They had reviewed the incident and discussed it with their internal team. The message said, "While we do not wish to interfere in private banking matters, we believe it is important to continue focusing on the business goals at hand. We recommend that both parties move forward and avoid unnecessary complications." Shh. Hands froze on the keyboard, so that was it. It made their choice. Silence. They didn't care about what happened. Or maybe they did, but not enough to do anything. The message was clear. Keep quiet and you'll get the deal. Speak out and you'll lose it. She sat there, stunned. Not shocked. Exactly, she had feared this might happen. But the reality of it still hit hard. She thought of all the business conferences where people said things like diversity matters and we care about equity. But when it came time to act, those words vanished into thin air. Later that night, she held a video meeting with her executive team. Their faces appeared one by one on the screen. Her CFO, her tech director, her head of operations, and a few others. These people had walked beside her through every trial, every risk, every sleepless night. She shared the full email with them. There was a long silence. Then her CFO said, "If we stay quiet, we may get the money. But at what cost?" Her head of tech added, "What happened to you could happen to any of us. Maybe not the same way, but the same disrespect." And her operations director said something she would never forget. "We didn't build this company just to survive. We built it to change something." She looked at their face, Sis's tired but strong, disappointed but unbroken. They believed in her. They believed in what SafeStream stood for, and in that moment, she knew what she had to do. The next day, she sent one final email to the firm. It was brief. "Thank you for the opportunity. However, SafeStream cannot move forward with a partnership that asks us to ignore the reality of discrimination in the spaces we operate. We hope you reconsider your stance on accountability in the future. Wish you the best." Then she hit send. No hesitation. The deal was done. Gone. $2 billion. Gone in a single click. But she didn't feel weak. She felt free. The media didn't know about it. No statement was released. The firm didn't comment. The bank certainly said nothing. But within certain business circles, word began to spread. Some people called her foolish. Others called her brave. But many just stayed silent, unwilling to pick a side. A week passed. Then another. Quiet. Then something unexpected happened. An employee from the international firm, a young black woman working in marketing, sent her a message. It said, "I heard what happened. Thank you. You reminded me that I don't have to stay silent to succeed." Then another message came from a startup founder in Detroit. "We stand with you." Which it did took guts. Then another from a group of women entrepreneurs in Atlanta. We've all experienced it. "Thank you for not pretending it's okay." The emails kept coming. Quiet support. Whispered truths. Shared pain. She began to realize that even though the big deal was gone, something bigger had started. A conversation. A shift. A reminder. SafeStream didn't crash. In fact, over the next few months, it grew stronger. A few new investors came forward, people who respected her decision and believed in her leadership. Clients who had once hesitated now reached out. Her team worked harder than ever, inspired by her integrity. She didn't forget what happened, but she used it. She gave talks not just about technology, but about what it means to lead with values. She mentored young women of color in business. She partnered with organizations that supported fair banking practices, and slowly she became more than just a tech CEO. She became a symbol of quiet power, of courage, of refusing to accept less. Every time she stood on a stage or sat in a boardroom, she carried that moment in the bank with her not as a wound, but as a lesson. People often asked her, was it worth it? And every time she said yes, because some things are more valuable than money, and because silence, yes, even when it seems safe, is never truly power. Not for people like her, not for anyone. The days after her decision were strangely quiet. After sending the final email that ended the $2 billion partnership, she expected a storm, but nothing came. No calls, no backlash, just silence, a deep, unsettling silence that felt both peaceful and heavy at the same time. She sat in her office, surrounded by the blueprints of her dreams. SafeStream's latest product designs lay neatly on the table. Everything was ready. The tech worked. The team was strong. Foundation was solid. But something had shifted inside her. Not fear, but a strange kind of calm. A calm that comes only after you choose your truth over your comfort. Her phone buzzed. It was her assistant letting her know that the next meeting was starting soon. She had asked the team to come together not to talk about the lost deal, but to talk about what came next. One by one, her leadership team joined the meeting room. Everyone knew what had happened, and yet there was no sadness in the room. There was pride, respect, even a sense of relief. They weren't tied to people who didn't see their worth anymore. They were free to build their vision without compromise. Stood at the front and spoke softly but clearly. We didn't lose a deal, she said. We protected our dignity, and that's something no one can put a price on. The team clapped. It wasn't loud or forced. It was real. Some even smiled. Through teary eyes. In that moment, she felt more powerful than she ever had before. But that feeling, as strong as it was, didn't last forever. The real world was waiting. News of the ended deal hadn't made it to the press. That was no accident. The large firm had no reason to make noise. They didn't want questions. They didn't want to explain why they let a major partnership slip away. Just because a CEO dared to talk about what happened to her in a bank. For them, silence was protection. But for her, silence had already done enough damage, so she decided to speak. Not in anger, not for revenge, but to be honest about her experience. She sat down with her communications director and crafted a message. It was a personal letter, not flashy, not dramatic, just real. She posted it to her LinkedIn page. In it, she told the story how she walked into a bank as a businesswoman, ready to finalize the biggest deal of her life, only to have her ID tossed on the floor like trash. How she stood there, not just as a customer, but as a human being demanding respect. And how the people she expected to support her chose silence instead. She ended the post with one clear sentence. Respect is not optional, not in life, and not in business. Within an hour, her inbox started to flood. Some messages were from people she knew. Others were from complete strangers. All of them had one thing in common. They knew that feeling, being doubted, being dismissed, being disrespected for no reason other than the color of their skin or the assumptions in someone.
House is mine.
A woman from London wrote, I'm a CEO too. I was once asked to wait outside my own meeting room because security didn't believe I belonged. Thank you for speaking up. A man from New York wrote, I'm in finance. I see this all the time. It's real. You're not alone. People shared their own stories. Some were heartbreaking. Others were quietly powerful. But all of them proved the same thing. What happened to her wasn't rare. It was just rarely talked about. Her post spread fast. Thousands of likes. Hundreds of comments. Articles began picking it up. The bank stayed silent. The firm stayed silent too. But the world was listening. Not long after, a local news station reached out. They asked if she would do a short interview about her experience. At first, she said no. She didn't want the attention. But then she thought about all the people who had messaged her privately, too afraid to speak. She realized her voice wasn't just hers anymore. It was shared. She agreed. The interview was short, just 10 minutes, but it was powerful. She spoke calmly, clearly, without hate. She described what happened, how she felt, why she walked away from the deal, and what she hoped would change. She ended the interview with a quiet but strong statement. This isn't about one teller. This is about a system that quietly tells people they don't belong. We can't fix what we won't face. After the interview aired, her story reached an even wider audience. More messages came in. A well-known civil rights lawyer offered support. A famous entrepreneur tweeted, "This woman gave up $2 billion to protect her dignity. That's leadership, but not." All the messages were supportive. Some criticized her. Why make it about race? You're too sensitive. You lost the deal. Move on. She read every comment, even the hateful ones. She didn't block them. She didn't hide. She understood that speaking truth always makes people uncomfortable, especially those who benefit from the silence. Her company started receiving invitations to speak at panels, diversity forums, leadership conferences. People wanted to hear her voice. Not just because she was bold, but because she was honest. Still, with all the attention, one question remained unanswered. What would happen to SafeStream now? She gathered her team again. They reviewed their numbers, their forecast, their client list. The lost deal had hurt. There was no denying that. But the company was still alive, stronger in some ways than before. They had each other. They had their product. They had a clear mission, and now they had the world's attention. She made a decision. They would raise capital, but only from people and firms who respected their values. No silent partners. No quiet racism hidden under contracts. Just clean. Honest partnerships? It wasn't easy. Many big investors stayed away. Some thought she was too risky now. Others didn't like that she made things political. But just a few saw the bigger picture. They didn't just see a CEO who walked away from $2 billion. They saw a woman who could lead a company through a storm with her head held high. They saw integrity, strength, vision. One of them was a black-owned venture capital firm based in Chicago. The founder called her personally. "I've watched this whole thing from the beginning," he said. "You did what most people wouldn't. We're ready to invest not just in your product, but in your leadership." She was quiet for a moment. Then she smiled, a real smile. For the first time in weeks, she felt hope rising again. They signed the deal 3 weeks later. It wasn't $2 billion. But it was honest money, clean, respected, and more than that, it came with partnership, not control. SafeStream started growing again. They launched their product, gained traction in the market. Clients trusted them more than ever, not just because of what the product could do, but because of who stood behind it. One day she walked past the same bank where it had all happened. The logo was still there. The glass doors still gleamed. But something felt different. Not about the bank, about her. She no longer needed their respect. She had her own. She stood there for a moment watching people go in and out. Then she turned and walked away, not out of pain, but out of peace. What happened to her wasn't just an insult. It was a turning point. It opened her eyes to things she had tried to overlook for too long. It reminded her that real leadership means making hard choices, even when it costs you, even when it hurts. She didn't forget that day, but she no longer replayed it with anger. She replayed it with power, because it was the day she realized that silence can protect you for a moment, but truth can protect your soul forever. And now, she was living proof of that truth. Months passed, but the memory of that day in the bank never faded from her heart. She didn't think about it every day anymore, but it had become a part of her, like a quiet shadow that walked beside her in the background of everything she did. Yet she didn't let it hold her back. Instead, she turned it into strength. She used it to walk into new rooms, speak on new stages, and make bigger decisions with more courage than ever before. Her company, SafeStream, had survived the storm. Actually, it had done more than survive. It had grown stronger. The team had tightened like family. Every person who stayed believed deeply in the mission. And they knew now more than ever that this was not just a business, it was a symbol of standing tall in the face of quiet cruelty and invisible walls. One morning, she was invited to speak at a leadership summit for women entrepreneurs. The event was being held in a huge conference center filled with hundreds of people. There were big-name CEOs, investors, authors, and influencers attending. The night before her speech, she couldn't sleep, not because she was nervous about speaking but because she wanted to make sure she said something that truly mattered. When it was her turn on stage, she walked out calmly. The room grew quiet as the spotlight landed on her. She looked across the sea of faces, some curious, some already inspired, some silently watching, unsure of what to expect. She didn't open with a fancy line. She didn't try to impress anyone. She just told the story. She told them how she walked into a bank to verify her identity for a massive business deal, and how the teller didn't see her as a CEO. She told them how her ID was tossed to the floor, and how the manager had barely reacted. She told them how she had walked out of the building that day, not just as a businesswoman, but as a black woman, reminded of her place in the world. But then, she told them how she made a choice. To speak, to stand, to walk away from a $2 billion deal, and to rebuild without shame or apology. There was no sound in the room, just deep listening. She ended by saying, "You can build something amazing, something world-changing, but if you lose your self-respect along the way, what have you really built?" The audience stood up. Applause filled the room. But more than the claps, what mattered to her were the eyes filled with emotion, with connection. She could tell that her words had landed deep. After the event, women lined up to speak with her. Some hugged her, some cried, some whispered, "Thank you. I needed that." One young woman said, "I've never seen someone who looks like me on that stage saying those things. I'm going to start my business now." That was the moment. She knew something big had changed, not just in her, but in the world around her. Over the next few months, her work doubled in meaning. SafeStream continued to grow. They launched a new feature that helped small businesses protect their financial data more easily. It was a success, and new clients joined quickly. But what stood out even more was the trust. People trusted her, not just as a tech founder, but as a human being who had proven she would never sell out her values. Media outlets continued to request interviews. She carefully chose which ones to do, not because she wanted fame, but because she only wanted to speak when it meant something. She had learned that not all attention is good. Not every camera deserved your story. Then came an unexpected moment. A senior executive from the same international firm that had once backed away from her reached out. It had been over a year since the deal had ended in silence. The email was polite, careful. Executive wrote that the company had recently gone through a leadership change. He said they had revisited some of their past decisions and were trying to better understand the moments where they had failed to support voices like hers. She read the email twice. There was no real apology in the words, no mention of regret, but there was curiosity. A door, slightly open. She didn't reply immediately. She sat with the email for a few days, thinking. Finally, she decided to respond. She didn't express anger or judgment. She simply said, "Thank you for reaching out. I'm always willing to talk about solutions. But if this conversation is only about cleaning up the past and not changing the future, I'll have to pass." The executive responded with surprising honesty. He said, "We want to learn. We know we got it wrong. We're not asking for forgiveness. We're asking for guidance." That was when she saw a real change, even if small. She agreed to meet. They had a video call. The new leadership team listened as she talked not about the money, not about the deal, but about the pain of being unseen, and the cost of staying silent in systems that crushed dignity. When the call ended, she didn't feel like she had one. Anything. But she felt something more valuable. Progress. The kind that takes time, honesty, and bravery from both sides. Later, her team asked if she would ever partner with that firm again. She paused, then said, "Maybe one day." They become the kind of partner that deserves us. By now, her story had become a quiet legend in certain business circles. Some people still whispered about how she walked away from $2 billion, but others told the story differently. They said she walked toward her truth. That's how she liked to see it too. She started mentoring young founders, especially women of color. Not just about business plans and fundraising, but about surviving the invisible battles. The ones where people call you too aggressive just for speaking up. the ones where silence seems like the safer road. She told them, "Build your business like you build a home. Make sure it stands on truth, not just profit." She also started visiting schools. Speaking to students who had big dreams but didn't see many examples that looked like them, she would tell them about that day in the bank. How a simple act of disrespect became the spark that changed her life. Not because it broke her, but because it showed her who she really was. In one school, a teenage girl raised her hand and asked, "Were you scared when you walked away from all that money?" She smiled and answered, "Yes, I was scared. I was more scared of losing myself." The room went silent again. The girl nodded. She understood. Eventually, the world moved on from the headlines. New stories replaced hers. New faces came into the spotlight. But her journey continued, quietly, steadily, powerfully. One morning, she sat in her home office looking out at the sunrise. She thought about everything that had happened. The betrayal, the silence, the growth, the victories that came not. With cheers, but with quiet resolve, she didn't feel bitter. She didn't feel angry. She felt grateful. Grateful for the moment that tested her, grateful for the people who stood with her, grateful for the woman she had become. She knew now that real success isn't just about money or power. It's about how you move through the world when no one is watching. It's about what you do when faced with unfairness. Do you bow your head, or do you stand taller? She had stood. And because of that, others were standing too. She turned her phone face down, closed her laptop, and stepped out into the fresh morning air. She had a full day ahead: meetings, calls, decisions to make, but none of it felt heavy anymore, because she wasn't carrying the weight of silence. Anymore, she was walking in truth, and that truth was worth far more than any deal, any title, or any bank's approval. She had found her peace not in a contract or a boardroom, but in her voice, and no one could ever take that away from her again.